Xianxia smiled and said, Madam is very right. When we're in danger or in need of help, the people close to us are the only people in the world who would help us irrespective of right or wrong, life or death. So, I'm just like Madam, I help my loved ones and disregard reason. Because even if you sided with reason, reason wouldn't side with you. After all, this is a world where the biggest fist is the most reasonable. The woman smiled as she nodded and said, Young Master Yang is absolutely right. Our subsequent discussions will definitely be much smoother since young Master Yang is able to think in this way. I'm very curious, said Xianxia. The woman smiled, and then she flicked her finger, causing a scroll to appear in front of Xianxia. Xianxia was puzzled by this when the woman said, Take a look at it first. Xianxia suppressed the bewilderment in his heart and opened the scroll. Soulseek Sword Technique, Mid-Grade Heaven Rank. The body is used as the medium while profound energy acts as the catalyst to condense the energy of the heavens and the earth into a sword. The sword locks onto the soul, and the sword will remain until the soul is destroyed. Caution, this technique exhausts a huge amount of profound energy, so it can't be cultivated by profounders beneath the 5th rank of the spirit realm. Once a sword is condensed by the profound energy is insufficient, then the user will suffer backlash from the energy of the heavens and the earth. Never forget this. Xianxia closed the scroll, and then he raised his head to gaze at her before he spoke with a calm expression. What's the meaning of this, madam? Even though he seemed extremely calm on the surface, tempestuous waves were surging through Xiangxia's heart. If it was merely a sword technique of this quality, then he would naturally not be so excited. He was excited by an effect that the Soulseek Sword technique possessed. That effect was its ability to lock onto his enemy's soul and remain active until the soul was destroyed. If the Soulseek Sword technique was combined with the Nether Ghost Flame or 9th Hell Cold Gale. When he thought about how a thread of the Nether Ghost Flame would pursue his enemy incessantly, Xianxia had the impulse to flee from this place with the Soulseek Sword technique's scroll. The woman glanced at Xianxia and said, Young Master Yang is much more composed than I expected. Xianxia placed the scroll onto the table and said, Madam, truthfully speaking, this sword technique is extremely helpful to me. However, I understand that there's no free food in this world. Since you presented such a precious treasure to me as soon as we met, then won't you tell me the reason first? Smart people are really easy to deal with. The woman smiled and said, I'll get straight to the point. Young Master Yang has probably noticed it as well. How can a woman like me manage such vast properties of the Southern clan? So, I hope that young Master Yang will join the clan. Marry into the clan? Xianxia was stunned, and then he hurriedly shook his head and said, Madam, I have to say that you're very beautiful indeed. Unfortunately, I already have someone in my heart, so it's absolutely impossible. What a joke. Marry into the clan? Wouldn't that be equivalent to allowing his wife to support him? Xianxia absolutely refused to do that no matter how fond of the Soulseek Sword technique he was. The corners of the middle-aged man's mouth instantly twitched when he heard Xianxia. What? A wisp of rosiness, embarrassment, and anger flashed on her face, and she glared fiercely at Xianxia and said, I meant that I hope young Master Yang would join a secret group of my clan. You're not asking me to marry into the clan? Xianxia was instantly embarrassed. So I was mistaken. Fortunately, he was thick-skinned, and he merely smiled with embarrassment before he said seriously, A secret group? A guard. The woman glanced at Xianxia, and her expression returned to calm when she noticed that it didn't seem like Xianxia was teasing her on purpose. She said, Not a guard. This secret group is an organization established by Mayan clan, and it's equivalent to being honorary elders. Mayan clan will provide all of you with a certain amount of cultivation resources every single year, and all of you can even mobilize a certain amount of forces of Mayan clan. Then what do we need to do? Asked Xianxia in a low voice. Nothing much. The woman smiled and said, Promise to do 3 things for Mayan clan every year. Of course, they will absolutely be within the scope of your ability. Besides that, all of you have to lend a hand if Mayan clan is in danger. Just that? Asked Xianxia. The woman nodded. Yang Yi pondered deeply and said, Madam, I'd like to know what sort of cultivation resources will be provided? 10,000 energy stones every month. The woman said, Moreover, we'll provide all of you with cultivation techniques and various combat techniques. Of course, they won't be provided for free, and you have to exchange contribution points for them. Contribution points? The woman nodded and said, The contribution points of Mayan clan. Mayan clan frequently issues some assignments or needs some things done when it's inconvenient for our clan to complete it ourselves. If you do it and complete it, then you'll obtain the corresponding amount of contribution points. Let me disclose a little to you. If you have sufficient contribution points, then you can even exchange them for high-grade heaven-rank combat techniques and treasures. Yang Yi glanced at the woman, and then he shook his head and said, Madam, that's really an effective move. At this moment, Yang Yi felt slight admiration towards this woman, because while the members of this secret group seemed to possess a huge amount of freedom and weren't restrained by the clan, it was actually not like that at all. For the sake of those so-called contribution points, how could those experts not fight desperately for the clan's sake? This was a vivid display of the saying, money can even move the gods. We're just making an exchange for what we need. The woman smiled and said, So are you willing to join? Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment, and then he shook his head and said, I'm sorry, but I refuse. Why? The woman wasn't surprised. I don't like being tied down. Yang Yi said, This is a form of restraint, and I don't like that. Even though I'm very tempted by this sword technique, but I'm still going to refuse. So that's the reason. The woman nodded and said, I respect young Master Yang's decision. However, please do take this sword technique. I and Bairu don't take back what I've given. I don't accept what I do not deserve. Yang Yi shook his head and refused. What a joke. He wasn't an idiot. How could it be that simple? He absolutely refused to believe that. He knew that he would definitely fall into her trap if he were to take it, and he discerned that this woman was just like Xianxia. She was full of schemed. Looks like young Master Yang is very vigilant towards me. And Bairu smiled and said, How about this? I'll give this sword technique to young Master Yang if you do something for me. What do you think? She really was planning something. Yang Yi put on a fake smile and said, Madam N, you should have said so earlier. Why beat around the bush like that? I, Yang Yi, am a straightforward person and I don't like all of that. So, if you want to work together with me, then please be frank at all times. All right? That's fine. And Bairu smiled and said, Actually, even if I didn't ask young Master Yang to do this, you'd still do it once the hidden dragon pagoda is opened, because I need young Master Yang to stop someone from obtaining the first during the hidden dragon rankings, and that person is in Nanjing. Perhaps you haven't heard of her yet, but I believe that it wouldn't be long before young Master Yang. No, the entire continent will know her name. And Nanjing. Yang Yi frowned and said, She has the surname as well? You're not wrong, there really is a link between her and I. However, it isn't any of your business. All you have to do is stop her from obtaining the first when the hidden dragon rankings begin. Alright? And Bairu spoke in an indifferent tone. Of course. Yang Yi didn't hesitate to agree, and then he put the soul-seek sword technique away. Why would he not agree? In any case, and Bairu had only asked him to stop her. And Bairu hadn't said that he had to succeed or that he had to kill her. So, he would stop her if he could when the time came, but wouldn't there be others there to accomplish it even if he failed? After all, even though he didn't know who Nanjing was, she would have to face the three outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory, Emoku, Mujun, Hanyu, and the other extraordinary geniuses in order to seize the first. Perhaps she'll be killed by someone else before I even encounter her? So, he had no reason to refuse, and he took the soul-seek sword technique with a clear conscience. The shameless are invincible. And Bairu glanced indifferently at him yet didn't speak. Madam N, I have some business to conduct with you. Yang Yi finally thought about his actual business here, which was to auction off the talismans. Go ahead. Yang Yi withdrew a top-grade talisman of the 5 elements and passed it to Bairu, and then he smiled and remained silent as he gazed at her. and Bairu frowned when she saw that it was a talisman of the 5 elements because she naturally didn't value such talismans. However, in next to no time, a trace of surprise had appeared in her eyes, and she was instantly interested when she noticed that it was a top-grade talisman. Of course, she wasn't interested in the talisman but the person who crafted it. "Young Master Yang is a talisman master?" asked Bairu. "Yes." Yang Yi didn't conceal it. "Young Master Yang crafted this." "Yes." A wisp of a smile appeared on Bairu's face, and she said, "I was almost deceived. I never expected that young Master Yang would actually be a genius talisman master." What's your success rate of crafting top-grade talismans? 20% or perhaps 30%? 50%. Yang Yi held back a little because he didn't want her to think that he was a freak. And Bairu restrained the smile on her face and spoke with slight displeasure. "Young Master Yang, stop joking." "Joking?" Yang Yi shook his head, and then he moved his hand forward before 1,000 top-grade talismans appeared in front of her. And Bairu was instantly stunned upon seeing these talismans. With her experience and wealth, what had she not seen in her life? But she'd still been shocked by this scene because all 1,000 of these talismans were top-grade talismans. My God! All of them are top-grade talismans. What is this? Huh? The return of the founding ancestor of all talisman masters? I want all of them. And Bairu paused for a moment and said, "Right. I want as many as you have. The price isn't a problem. Right, I can even form a long-term arrangement with young Master Yang. In other words, my treasure-gathering room will take all the talismans that you craft. Young Master Yang, you can set the conditions and price." He wasn't surprised by this because top-grade talismans were extremely rare. Not to mention that it was 1,000. With a flip of his wrist, a list appeared in front of Bairu, and she instantly frowned upon looking through the list. The treasures on the list were naturally the materials Yang Yi required in order to cultivate the heavenly devil physique. Yang Yi smiled when he saw Bairu frown. "What? Then treasure-gathering room doesn't have these treasures? Isn't the treasure-gathering room said to have gathered all the treasures in the world? Could it be that it's only a joke?" And Bairu glanced at Yang Yi and said indifferently, "Young Master Yang, there's no need to provoke me with words. Besides the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts, my treasure-gathering room does have the rest of the materials listed here. Even if it's the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts, my treasure-gathering room is still capable of obtaining it. However, I'd like to ask if young Master Yang can afford the price." Yang Ye's heartbeat instantly sped up when he heard this. However, his expression was extremely calm as he said, "Madam, and name your price." And Bairu raised the teacup in front of her and took a light sip before she said indifferently, 100 million energy stones." "What?" Yang Yi suddenly stood up, but he seemed to feel that it wasn't right and sat back down again. After that, the corners of his mouth twitched as he laughed dryly. "Madam, are you sure you aren't mistaken? What do you think?" And Bairu glanced indifferently at Yang Yi. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he said, "Madam, isn't it a little too expensive?" "Is it?" And Bairu chuckled lightly and said, "Young Master Yang, I won't say much about those natural treasures of the heavens and the earth which you require, even though they're of the 5 elements and are treasures that mutually promote and restrain each other. They aren't a huge deal to my treasure-gathering room. However, the blood essence from the 3 divine beasts, the vermilion bird, black tortoise, and white tiger, that you asked for aren't treasures that can be obtained with money. After all those clans reside in the demon territory, and the strengths of every single one of them are extremely terrifying. Moreover, they're utterly vengeful and protective of their members. So, obtaining their blood essence is to utterly offend them. The slightest mistake might even cause a war between the demon race and the human race. It's too expensive." Yang Yi shook his head and laughed bitterly. What a joke. 100 million energy stones were something that couldn't be obtained even if he sold himself away. "Then my hands are tied," said Bairu. The atmosphere here became deathly silent. Yang Yi didn't want to give up. After all, the heavenly devil physique was extremely formidable indeed. If he was able to cultivate it successfully, then with the help of the nether ghost flame and his violet profound energy, his physical body would definitely be able to arrive at a terrifying state. In that way, he would have the ability to go against these monstrous geniuses in the ancient battlefield and even the Flower Palace. However, it was truly expensive to a terrifying degree. 100 million energy stones. Even the entire Origin School's wealth was probably not that great. Can I buy it on credit? Xianxia's face couldn't help but flush red as soon as he finished speaking these words. These words were quite shameless, but he couldn't be bothered about that. And Bairu's eyelids twitched, and then she gazed at Xiangyi before she shook her head slightly. She smiled as she said, "Young Master Yang, you were even able to speak such words. I'm truly in awe." Xiangyi shrugged. In any case, he'd decided to disregard his face. He said, "Madam, just tell me if it's possible or not. Truthfully speaking, these materials are truly extremely important to me. If you're willing to let me owe those energy stones for now, then I'll never forget this kindness." And Bairu fell silent. After a short while, she suddenly said, "According to rumor, young Master Yang has attained the enlightened sword heart. Is that true?" Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he nodded. He knew that he had to display his value, otherwise why would she allow him to owe her that amount of energy stones? And Bairu's grip on her teacup tightened when she saw Yang Yi nod. And then she said, "Do you really possess the enlightened sword heart?" "Of course." And Bairu took a long glance at Yang Yi when she heard this, and then she said, "It's not impossible to let you owe it for now. However, young Master Yang must promise me something, and I'll give all of those things to you if you agree." Yang Yi said seriously, "What's the condition?" "Become a chief honorary elder of Mayan clan." And Bairu looked him straight in the eye as she said, "To tell young Master Yang the truth, I'm making a long-term investment. Truthfully speaking, your current strength is too low, and it's completely useless to Mayan clan. However, I look favorably upon young Master Yang's future. In other words, if Mayan clan is in danger 100 or even 1,000 years from now, and it's within your ability, then I hope you'll lend Mayan clan a hand. This investment of yours is extremely risky." Yang Yi looked her straight in the eye as well and said, "After all, the future is full of variables. Once a variable appears, then Madam and might have wasted 100 million energy stones. Moreover, even if I'm able to live for a few hundred of 1,000 years. But can you be sure that I wouldn't change my mind then?" And Bairu smiled and said, "Investments have always been risky. I'm betting on young Master Yang's future and character." Yang Yi gazed at her for a long time before he said, "I admire Madam's courage. I, Yang Yi, promise that so long as the Inclan doesn't betray me in the future, then I won't betray the Inclan." And Bairu glanced at Yang Yi, and then she passed Yang Ye's list to the middle-aged man by her side and said, "Utilize all the resources of the clan to gather these materials as soon as possible. You can purchase those we can't find from the Northern Inclan, and there's no need to worry about the price." "Yes," the middle-aged man answered before he withdrew from the hall. Yang Yi said sincerely, "Thank you." And Bairu smiled and said, "If you truly want to thank me, then sell all the talismans you craft in the future to my treasure-gathering room. All right?" Yang Yi said with a smile, "Of course." And Bairu placed a spatial ring in front of Yang Yi and said, "These are the energy stones for those 1,000 top-grade talismans. It isn't much, but it should be enough for young Master Yang." "Thank you." Yang Yi spoke sincerely. Regardless of whether she was using him or not, it was he, Yang Yi, who was getting the benefits right now. Moreover, she was very frank. So, it could be said that it was a gamble and a trade, and it was one where she paid the bill first and had resolved everything he needed urgently. Thus, it could truly be considered as a form of kindness to him. And Bairu nodded. And then she suddenly said, "Right. Do you know why the Hidden Dragon Pagoda still hasn't opened?" Yang Yi frowned when he heard this, and then he shook his head. Truthfully speaking, it was something he was very puzzled about as well. Because he'd been at the ancient battlefield for a long time, but there had been no movement from the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. And Bairu stood up slowly before she shot her gaze towards the horizon outside the door. Her eyes had a wisp of a solemn expression in them as she said, "Because one person isn't here." "What do you mean?" Xianxia was puzzled. "The first martial god's spear, Sky Split, is needed to open the hidden dragon pagoda. Because the dragon vein beneath the hidden dragon pagoda was sealed by the first martial god. In the past, the 9th rank sects and the other extraordinary powers would head to Martial God Mountain to borrow Sky Split. However, those powers didn't borrow it this time, and Bairu spoke slowly. "Why didn't they?" And Bairu glanced at Xianxia and said, "Because Sky Split is about to have an owner." Xiangya's expression became solemn when he heard this, and he said, "You're saying the martial god is about to appear?" And Bairu nodded and said, "The geniuses this year are much more numerous and terrifying than the past. It's a true battle between outstanding geniuses this time. I'm very curious if this generation's martial god will be able to trample on the corpses of those monstrous geniuses to ascend to the top of the hidden dragon pagoda." When she spoke up to hear, and Bairu paused for a moment and said, "Young Master Yang, improve your strength as soon as possible, because according to the information that I've obtained, that future martial god is already on the way to Martial God Mountain. If nothing unexpected occurs, then the hidden dragon pagoda will be opened in 2 months at most. At that time, you'd truly be courting death if you tried to ascend the pagoda without formidable strength." Xianxia nodded. Actually, even if he possessed 2 natural treasures now, he still felt that his current strength was slightly weak. Yes, while he was in the ancient battlefield that was full of geniuses, he had no sense of safety regardless of how many trump cards he possessed. This was also the reason why he'd acted so shamelessly and asked her to let him owe her those energy stones. "Young Master Yang, just stay in the treasure gathering room. It's extremely huge, and there are numerous places to cultivate at. You can be at ease because no one will disturb you while you cultivate here. I'll send over the materials you require in a while." And Bairu sat back down and spoke indifferently. "She's telling me to leave." Xianxia was sensible, so he stood up and cupped his fists to her while he said, "Then I'll be troubling you." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia walked out of the hall. When Xianxia walked out of the hall, the figure of a woman that was like a shadow had suddenly appeared from behind where Xianxia sat just now. "Little Ru, was it worth it?" said the woman. "It was." And Bairu had a calm expression, and her eyes were tranquil. Moreover, she spoke with a certain tone. "Aunt, you've seen the information related to him. He's an extremely loyal person. Such a person can only be treated kindly and moved by way of favor. So long as Mayan clan doesn't betray him, then he will definitely not betray Mayan clan in the future." "Are you that sure he'll become an extraordinary expert?" asked the woman. "I'm not." "Then why? But even if he has only 1/100th of a chance, it's still worth it for me to give it a try, isn't it?" And Bairu said, "If I lose the gamble, it would only be 100 million energy stones, but what if I won the bet? If I won, then our clan would be able to exist for 10,000 years. Even though he possesses the enlightened sword heart, he may not necessarily become another founding ancestor of the sword sect." The woman rebuked. "Just the enlightened sword heart is already sufficient for us to make this bet, is it not?" The woman fell silent. After a short while, she said, "Do you think he can stop in Nanjing?" "He can't." And Bairu said, "Unless he really possesses the strength that the sword sect's founding ancestor possessed when he came to the ancient battlefield all those years ago. No, even if it was the sword sect's founding ancestor, he might not be able to obstruct her footsteps while being around the same age as her. She's the most monstrous genius I've ever seen." "Then why did you ask that kid? It's always good to have some hope, isn't it?" And Bairu said, "Life is full of surprises. Perhaps he might be able to give us a pleasant surprise." The woman sighed and didn't speak further, and Bairu suddenly asked, "Right, Aunt, do you know why so many astounding and monstrous geniuses have appeared in the ancient battlefield this time? An upheaval is coming." At the cultivation grounds of a stone house within the treasure gathering room, Xianxia's eyes flickered with the glow of excitement and happiness as he gazed at the natural treasures that were piled up on the ground in front of him. Everything had been gathered, so now, he could start cultivating the heavenly devil physique. Yang Yi hadn't chosen to cultivate his physical body in the treasure-gathering room. He'd left ancient Domain City and arrived in the depths of a mountain range that was a few thousand kilometers away from the city. At a pool of water, Yang Yi utilized the nether ghost flame to forcefully merge the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts, and then he tossed the merged blood essence into the pool. In an instant, the water within the entire pool had immediately turned shockingly red. After that, Yang Yi extracted the essence of the 5 natural herbs before pouring them all into the pool of water, causing strands of faint and refreshing fragrance to drift out from within the pool. After he finished doing all of that, Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he flicked his finger and the nether ghost flame appeared on his palm. Could be said that the nether ghost flame was the key, because it would be completely meaningless even if he just cultivated the heavenly devil physique to its highest level without the nether ghost flame. After all, Emoku had already accomplished that. Actually, since the very beginning, he hadn't attached importance to the heavenly devil physique, and he'd attached importance to the methods of cultivation provided within this technique, because it was exactly what he lacked. Otherwise, if he merely utilized the nether ghost flame to simply temper his body, then the effects would be extremely limited. Could be said that he wasn't cultivating the heavenly devil physique. He was utilizing the techniques of cultivation within the heavenly devil physique to create a new technique of his own. With a flick of his finger, the nether ghost flame flew into the pool of water. In an instant, the entire pool of water had started to boil and transform into an ocean of fire. The water within the pool wasn't evaporated by the nether ghost flames because it was being controlled by Yang Yi, and the water within the pool started to seethe incessantly like lava instead. The wave of heat that swept towards Yang Yi caused his clothes to be instantly transformed into ash, while the intense burning feeling he felt caused Yang Yi's brows to knit together. However, he didn't hesitate at all before he leaped into the pool of water. "What a familiar feeling," said Yang Yi as he entered the ocean of fire. This was much better than any other time in the past. After all, his current physical body was incomparable to when he'd just tempered his body for the first time. Moreover, his body had a certain level of resistance towards the nether ghost flame after being tempered by it on numerous occasions. So, the tempering he experienced this time was much easier when compared to the past. According to the description of the heavenly devil physique, he had to absorb the energy contained within the 5 natural herbs and blood essence of the 4 divine beasts, and he was only barely able to attain the first level of the heavenly devil physique by fully refining and absorbing them. However, Yang Yi didn't act entirely according to this method. He mainly absorbed the blood essence, and he utilized the natural herbs to nourish and repair his body. After all, the blood essence contained extremely violent energy, and coupled with the ceaseless burning of the nether ghost flame, even the ceaseless repair provided by his violet profound energy was insufficient to repair his body. So, he utilized those natural herbs to assist in this. After all, his physical body required constant stimulation. The greater the stimulation it received, the stronger his physical body would be. Even though this was like inflicting self-torture, it was needless to say that this method was extremely effective. Presently, Yang Yi had to absorb, refine, and stimulate over and over again. Actually, it was just Yang Yi who was cultivating painstakingly in the ancient battlefield. There were numerous other monstrous geniuses who were doing the same. All of these monstrous geniuses had huge ambitions. Yes, their ambition was naturally to be the first on the hidden dragon rankings. What did the first represent? It represented the strongest amongst the younger generation on profounder continent. It represented being remembered forever in the history of the continent. It represented receiving the karmic luck and protection of the heavens. It represented, in short, no matter if its reputation or authority, one would possess both upon obtaining the first. Moreover, all of them were geniuses, so how could they be willing to submit before their peers? The 9th hell, the nether god's tomb. Emoku sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed slightly. Strands of devil energy seeped out incessantly from his body and ceaselessly corroded the pitch-black spear in front of him. This spear was exactly the nether god's spear. That day, he'd pursued the evil lord for a few thousand kilometers with Hunyu, and the evil lord had taken the initiative to hand the spear over because he wasn't a match for them. Of course, they definitely fought for a while. In short, no matter what, the Nether God's spear had fallen into Emoku's hands. After he obtained it, he'd come to the tomb with Hanyu, and he'd started to refine it. However, this process of refinement had actually gone on for almost 2 months. As his devil energy ceaselessly corroded the spear, it started to tremble violently as if it intended to charge free from the layer of devil energy. Suddenly, Emoku opened his eyes and stretched his right hand forward before he grabbed tightly onto the spear. However, the spear started trembling even more violently. Even with the strength that Emoku possessed, the spear was actually on the verge of struggling free from his grasp. Emoku grunted coldly, and then a strand of devil energy surged like a torrent into the Nether God's spear. After around 15 minutes, the spear finally calmed down. Congratulations! Right at this moment, Hanyu suddenly appeared behind Emoku, and he said, "You finally obtained its acknowledgement after such a long period of refinement." Emoku grunted coldly and said, "Unfortunately, that fellow evil lord was able to escape. If it wasn't for him, I would have been done a long time ago. He won't be able to escape, because he'll have to ascend the hidden dragon pagoda in the end, right?" said Hanyu. Emoku nodded and said, "You've succeeded in obtaining the Nether God's inheritance?" "Of course." A wisp of a solemn expression flashed in Emoku's eyes when he heard this, because even he had to fear Hanyu who'd obtained the Nether God's inheritance. As if he knew what Emoku was thinking, Hanyu said, "Our true enemies are the humans. At the very least, we're allies until all the human profounders are annihilated, right?" Emoku nodded. Right at this moment, a youth from the devil race had suddenly appeared here. He arrived in front of Emoku before he knelt on the ground with a thump, and he spoke with blood-red eyes. "Big brother, MOU and a total of 106 other brothers who were hunting humans outside Ancient Domain City were annihilated. You must avenge them." "What?" Emoku's eyes instantly opened wide while a strand of terrifying devil energy surged out explosively from within his body, and he said furiously, "Say that one more time." That youth's heart felt cold beneath the terrifying, imposing aura that Emoku emanated, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back, and was unable to speak another word. "He's not wrong." Meanwhile, Hanyu suddenly said, "It wasn't just 107 members of your devil race. Even members of my nether race perished as well. It was that sword cultivator, Xianxia, who we took to be an ant that day." Emoku took a deep breath while killing intent surged violently in his eyes. He said, "It was him? Good, good, very good. You kill 107 brothers of my devil race. Good, very good. Since you killed 107 brothers of my devil race, I'll slaughter your entire family. No, I'll slaughter all the human profounders in the ancient battlefield." As soon as he finished speaking, Emoku's figure flashed and instantly vanished on the spot with the Nether God's spear in his hand. "Ha ha! Go on and kill. Kill until blood flows into a river. The taste of souls. Ha ha ha!" Hanyu vanished on the spot as well. At the same time that Emoku and Hanyu's groups were heading to Ancient Domain City to look for Xianxia, a woman had arrived at the foot of a mountain in the ocean towards the south of the Southern Territory. This mountain was 30 kilometers tall, and its sides were completely smooth like a mirror from top to bottom. There wasn't any foothold for one to use. A woman had arrived at the foot of the mountain. She wore grayish-white clothes that stuck tightly to her body, causing her hot and voluptuous figure to be on full display. Her jet-black hair was tied into a ponytail behind her head, and it flowed all the way down to her elbows. She had an oval-shaped face, a sharp chin, slanted eyes, and a sharp and fierce gaze. Even though her appearance wasn't peerlessly beautiful, she had a unique bearing that was attractive on its own. She kept her hands behind her back as she raised her head to gaze at the peak of the mountain that extended into the end of her field of vision. Her gaze was indifferent as she said, "This is Martial God Mountain? Haha, the Martial God. I hope you don't disappoint me. And Nanjing. Otherwise, I'll flatten this mountain. As soon as she finished speaking, Nanjing strode step by step towards the smooth surface of the mountain. When she arrived before the mountain wall, her eyes had narrowed slightly before she suddenly punched the smooth mountain wall with both fists. Bang! A muffled bang resounded, and then two impressions of her fists that were around a few centimeters deep had appeared there, and Nanjing leaped up, and her feet descended into those impressions. After that, she smashed her fists forward once more. Just like that, and Nanjing utilized such a method to gradually climb up the mountain. It was slightly slow, but her gaze was extremely firm, and her face didn't have even a trace of exhaustion or fear. It was like this 30 kilometers tall mountain was just flat ground to her. Below ancient domain city, the severed heads of a few hundred human profounders had been arranged into two huge characters. On the other hand, their corpses had been hung on the city walls, causing fresh blood to dye the ground outside the city red. Moku held the Nether God's spear in his hand while he stood proudly below the city, and the spear had already transformed from its original pitch-black color into scarlet red right now. Countless human profounders were looking at this with astonishment from atop the city, and their eyes were filled with extreme terror as they gazed at Moku, who was like a god of slaughter. Yang Yi, if you don't show yourself, then I'll kill 100 human profounders every single day until all the human profounders in the ancient battlefield are annihilated. Emoku's voice was like a resounding bell that swept over from afar. Right at this moment, a few dozen human profounders were brought over to Emoku. Yang Yi, will you show yourself or not? Emoku shouted in a serious voice. No one answered him, and the area atop the city wall was completely deathly silent. Yang Yi, you bastard! Show yourself. You had the ability to kill the members of the Devil race and Nether race, so don't you have the ability to stand up for what you did? Ah! Moku, it was Yang Yi who wronged you, not us. It was he who killed the members of your Devil race and not us. Go look for Yang Yi if you have the ability. What's the point of killing us? Haha! All of you spineless bastards. Isn't it just death? I fucking admire Yang Yi. There are tens of thousands of us, but we're actually being hunted and killed by less than 100 profounders from the Devil race. What a fucking humiliation. Only Yang Yi fared to lead a group to go against them, and he even killed over 100 fellows from the Devil race. Do you know how fucking delighted I was when I heard the news? Unfortunately, I don't have the chance to meet him. You idiot. If you want to die, then die yourself. I don't want to die. Boss Missouri-ku. So long as you let me live, I'm willing to join the Devil race. I'm willing. However, Moku didn't even spare a glance at these profounders. He merely remained silent for 10 breaths of time before he raised his left hand, and then suddenly waved it down as he said, "Kill them all!" What was Yang Yi doing at this moment? 1 month later, Yang Yi was seated cross-legged on a mountain with his eyes closed, and a sword was floating in front of him. Yang Yi hadn't chosen to temper his body every single day throughout this month. He chose to temper his body in the morning, and then cultivate sword techniques and comprehend the sword Dao through the afternoon and night. After all, the sword was his foundation, and his physical body was only supplementary. So, he naturally has to differentiate them well. Since he possessed the enlightened sword heart, he definitely had an enormous advantage when comprehending the sword Dao, because he was able to quickly enter an empty state. His life had always been a constant alternation between being busy and slaughter. He'd never sat down and meditated like he was doing right now. Yes, since he was born, he'd been constantly busy. At a young age, he was busy trying to survive and make a livelihood. When he was older, he was busy for the sake of cultivating and for his loved ones. Now, it was for the future of his loved ones. He'd truly been too busy throughout these 20 years of time, and he was busy to the point of never being able to have a calm moment to himself. The moon can only be truly reflected on a clear pool, while clarity can only be attained through calmness. Calmness allows the voice of the heart to be heard, purifies the heart and reveals the truth of all things, allowing one to see through everything just like a god. Even vitality and difficulty would be clearly revealed. The strength to take on a burden is akin to responsibility, while the contrary is powerlessness. Knowing when to let go is the key to the grand Tao while the contrary is going astray. The enlightened sword heart comes from the clarity of the heart and the comprehension of the mind. Opening it, acknowledging it, and immersing myself within it would make the Tao naturally appear by my side. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes were completely clear. He gazed at the sword that floated in front of him as he said lightly, "Shatter." As soon as he spoke, the sword shattered with a light bang, and it was transformed into countless pieces. However, right at this moment, Yang Yi spoke lightly once more. "Join!" A shocking scene appeared. The sword that had originally been shattered into countless pieces had swiftly converged together and recovered to its previous state. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he slowly clenched his right fist. "Shatter!" As soon as he spoke, everything in an area of 30 m around Yang Yi seemed like glass that had suffered a heavy blow. Bang! A light bang resounded as they exploded into pieces, and only a few breaths of time had passed when the area around Yang Yi was covered in fine sand. Yang Yi flicked his finger, and the nether ghost flame flashed onto his palm. After that, he flicked his finger again, and it instantly swept out explosively. In an instant, it transformed into an ocean of fire that covered the surroundings. However, Yang Yi was completely unharmed as he stood amidst the ocean of fire. Moreover, the nether ghost flame actually seemed as if it had merged into one with him because Yang Ye's entire body was covered by it. Yang Yi took another deep breath when he saw this, and then he flicked his finger. A strand of violet sword chi shot forward explosively. However, right when it was about to exceed a distance of 30 m, Yang Yi had said in a light voice, "Stop!" This strand of violet sword chi instantly and shockingly stopped on the spot. Yang Yi couldn't help but clench his hands while he gazed at the strand of sword chi, because he noticed that this strand of violet sword chi, which was boosted by his 6th level slaughter sword intent, was actually at least 5 times stronger than before. With a flip of his wrist, 200 swords appeared in the surroundings, and then a shocking scene instantly appeared. These 200 swords actually started to dance about violently throughout the surroundings, and then rays of light flickered incessantly with an extremely shocking impetus. "Stop!" Yang Yi shouted lightly, and all 200 swords had instantly stopped on the spot. "Mince!" He shouted lightly once more, and the 200 swords instantly started moving violently in an area of 30 m around him, and countless rays of light enveloped Yang Yi. 1 hour later, Yang Yi sat cross-legged on the ground while in deep thought. He was thinking why he was like an overlord within an area of 30 m. Especially because swords and sword techniques would actually become 5 times stronger in this area of 30 m. Moreover, he seemed to be capable of seeing through everything in that area of 30 m. Everything was completely bare before him, and he could discern its essence with a single glance. In next to no time, Yang Yi thought of a possibility, and he felt that it might be because of the enlightened sword heart. When he utilized the enlightened sword heart in the past, he was able to see through the techniques or weak points of his enemies just like that. But now, the enlightened sword heart wasn't a purely defensive ability anymore, because while it was in an area of 30 m, the might of the sword techniques he executed while utilizing the enlightened sword heart would be directly improved by 5 times. Unfortunately, he'd been always discovering and exploring the path of the sword by himself. So, even if he comprehended some things, he didn't know what it was, let alone how to utilize it. This was the sad part for him. What could he do? He was all by himself and didn't belong to a sect. Looks like I have to seek guidance from Elder Mu if I have the time. Yang Yi shook his head and smiled, and he stopped thinking about all of that. However, since he'd comprehended it, then he should name it. After a short moment of deep thought, Yang Yi grinned and said, "Since it can improve sword techniques, then I'll call it the sword domain." Right, sword domain. I'll call it that. Ha. Yang Yi suppressed the excitement in his heart and put the 200 swords away. He merely left a single sword floating in front of him. Yang Yi smiled lightly as he gazed at the sword, and then he flicked his finger, causing the nether ghost flame to attach itself to the sword. In an instant, the sword became a flaming sword. The sword suddenly turned around under Yang Ye's control, and then its tip was pointed straight at him. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot, and his figure shot explosively towards the distance. However, the flaming sword instantly shot forward towards him. After that, no matter how Xianxia fled, the flaming sword continued pursuing him without stopping. Moreover, it was extremely swift as well. If Xianxia hadn't slapped a Strider talisman on himself and utilized the Gale shoes, then the flaming sword would have probably pierced a hole through him. He'd been persistently training in the Soulseek sword technique since the day he started to temper his physical body. Throughout this month, he'd practically fully comprehended this sword technique. Of course, it was mainly because he possessed the enlightened sword heart. After all, it allowed him to see through the essence, advantages, and flaws of this technique. Since he could see through them, wouldn't it be much easier to cultivate? Could be said that Xianxia had just noticed why the enlightened sword heart was truly terrifying and abnormal. It was even more terrifying than the nether ghost flame. Of course, it wasn't as terrifying as the mysterious tiny vortex. Because his grasp of the sword domain wasn't that skilled yet, he hadn't fully grasped the Soulseek sword technique, and he hadn't tempered his physical body to a satisfying state. Xianxia had chosen to continue cultivating on this mountain range. However, he didn't know that this decision of his would cause countless people to die outside Ancient Domain City. Of course, he wouldn't care even if he knew. At this moment, almost 2,000 human corpses were hanging on the walls of Ancient Domain City, and fresh blood had dyed the walls red, causing it to be an extremely bloody and terrifying scene. Throughout this month, it was like Xianxia had vanished into thin air, and he didn't show himself no matter how Emoku cursed and insulted Xianxia. So, in his rage, Emoku had blocked the entrance of the city, and then he sent experts from the Devil Rage to capture the other human profounders who'd left the city to temper themselves. Once these human profounders were captured, the youths from the Devil Race would bring them to the city before Emoku killed them one by one. Such bloody methods caused the human profounders to be astounded and furious. They were furious because Emoku was like a god of slaughter who killed any human he saw, and he didn't respect them at all. On the other hand, they were astounded because Emoku's strength was formidable to the point it induced despair in them. Especially when he was holding the Nether God's spear. There had definitely been human profounders who were unable to endure this any longer throughout this month, and they'd left the city to challenge Emoku to a one-on-one battle. However, without exception, the outcome had always been that their corpses joined the others that were hanging on the city walls. However, the three outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory seemed to have vanished as well, and they hadn't shown themselves at all. During this period, there were some who had suggested that all of them joined forces to fight the group from the Devil Race. However, the surroundings would definitely fell into silence every single time such a suggestion was made. Yes, so long as they stood atop the city wall and didn't go down, then no matter how formidable Emoku was, could he harm them at all? But if they were to leave the city, then they might die. Moreover, what benefit was there from doing such a thing? Vent their anger and get revenge? What a joke. They weren't that stupid. Not to mention that Emoku was looking for Xianxia, so wouldn't they be dying for Xianxia if they left the city? Even though people were constantly dying outside the city, did it have anything to do with them? Yes, there was some link between a few of them, but most of those profounders who died weren't related to them at all. Just think about it, would anyone risk their lives for someone that wasn't related to them at all? Where's Xianxia? Could it be that he isn't going to stand up and deal with this matter? This matter was caused by him in the end. Some profounders on the city hall had started thinking about Xianxia, who was the culprit. Stand up and deal with it? Someone else laughed coldly and said, and give his life away? In my opinion, Xianxia is really smart. He killed the members of the Devil Race, seized their treasures, and made all of us human profounders bear the consequences. What a brilliant plan. Someone else ridiculed. Actually, Xianxia didn't do anything wrong. After all, they were truly too arrogant, and some human profounders should stand up and oppose them. Moreover, didn't all of you clap and cheer when you heard that Xianxia and those profounders from the Southern Territory had annihilated that group of profounders from the Devil Race and Nether Race? What? All of you are changing your minds now. We did cheer when he did that. However, since he killed them, then shouldn't he come forward and bear the consequences as well? Could it be that all those brothers who died in vain outside the city deserved death? If you don't have sufficient strength, then who else can you blame if you die after coming to the ancient battlefield? Is Xianxia your father? Why are you always speaking on his behalf? Do you want a fight? A fight? Bring it on. I've been unable to stand the sight of you for a long time. The profounders on the city walls had started to argue intensely. Time flashed by quickly, and another month passed in the blink of an eye. Martial God Mountain, a foot descended onto the peak of the mountain, and then a second foot descended there as well. At a different place in the ancient battlefield, a man in a violet-colored robe had cut off two names on the thick book of judgment in his hand. Li Qingshui, Nangong Meng. Beneath the ground at the ninth hell, a man that was covered within an enormous golden dragon rose slowly from there, and the dragon-shaped seal in his hand revolved swiftly. Suddenly, the man said, Xianxia, I have to thank you properly. If it wasn't for you, the mortal emperor seal wouldn't have acknowledged me as its master. Ha ha! I'll come to thank you right now. At the peak of another mountain, a one-armed woman knelt on the ground, and a pitch-black ancient sheath floated silently in front of her. What's the sword? A voice suddenly appeared. Life! What's the sword? The voice resounded once more. Soul! What's the sword? My everything! Silence covered the surroundings. After a short while, the voice sighed faintly. Never mind, 8th level sword intent and 8th level wind intent. Even though you don't possess the enlightened sword heart, you're still an extraordinary genius in the sword Tao. Waiting any longer would just be in vain. As soon as the voice finished resounded, a sword howl that resounded through the heavens and the earth suddenly erupted from the ancient sheath. At this moment, all the peerless experts of the continent gazed towards a single direction. At the bottom of Death Abyss and in front of the cottage, Elder Mu gazed up into the sky for a short while, and then he shook his head slowly and said, The Sword Emperor has appeared, yet it isn't him. What a... It was also at this moment that the swords of all sword cultivators throughout the continent had struggled free of their owners' grasps, and then a sword howl erupted towards the sky from within them. All swords submit before the Sword Emperor. Xianxia, who was cultivating sword techniques on the mountain, had suddenly frowned because the sword in his hand actually intended to struggle free from his grasp when that sword howl resounded through the sky. Xianxia gazed at the sword in his hand as he said in a light voice, Even you intend to submit to that so-called Sword Emperor? He naturally knew what that sword howl from before represented. After all, Elder Mu had told him a great deal about the Sword Emperor in the past. Someone had become the Sword Emperor. Xianxia didn't feel uncomfortable when facing such a fact. After all, he'd never thought about becoming the Sword Emperor. The title of Sword Emperor was the highest honor amongst sword cultivators. But who said that the Sword Emperor was the strongest amongst sword cultivators? In the past, the Sword Emperor had always been the strongest, but that was in the past. Xianxia refused to believe that. In any case, his sword wouldn't submit to anyone. The sword in his hand seemed as if it hadn't heard Xianxia, and it trembled violently. If Xianxia hadn't restrained it by force, it would have probably charged into the sky by now. Xianxia exerted a little strength, and a bang resounded lightly as the sword was instantly transformed into countless pieces. Xianxia raised his head and looked towards the horizon before he chuckled lightly. Interesting. Just a sword howl actually made my sword not hesitate to betray me. The Sword Emperor. I'm filled with anticipation. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia slowly withdrew the smile on his face, and then he flicked his finger. A pair of enormous dark wings that were formed from countless fine tornadoes had appeared on his back. When this pair of dark wings appeared behind him, a gale of violet wind appeared out of thin air, while waves of wind swept out incessantly from Xianxia's legs, causing the surroundings to be transformed into a mess. This pair of enormous dark wings were naturally formed from the 9th Hell Cold Gale. In the past 2 months, Xianxia had been constantly thinking about the effects of the 9th Hell Cold Gale, and he felt that it was a huge waste if he used it merely for offense. After all, he had the Nether Ghost Flame to take care of that. Moreover, the 9th Hell Cold Gale was only extremely lethal towards the soul, and its damage towards the body wasn't as terrifying as the Nether Ghost Flame. Moreover, the consumption of his profound energy from every usage of it was extremely enormous, so he'd given up on utilizing it for offense. After a period of research and testing, he'd finally discovered another effect of the ninth Hell Cold Gale, and it was the ninth Hell Cold Gale's ability to increase his speed. Because the ninth Hell Cold Gale could control the speed of the wind. After he noticed this, Xianxia decisively started to research how to utilize the ninth Hell Cold Gale to increase his speed. After all, his movement techniques were extremely weak. If he could utilize the ninth Hell Cold Gale, then his speed wouldn't be a weakness anymore, and it might even be a strength of his. Because the ninth Hell Cold Gale was truly too swift. How fast was it? It was fast to the point Xianxia could form over 100 afterimages in a breath of time. If he utilized the Gale Shoes and Astrider Talismans, then his speed could increase even more. However, there was a flaw. At least it was one to him for now. That flaw was that it exhausted too much profound energy. Just like the Nether Ghost Flame, utilizing it once would practically dry up all the profound energy within his tiny vortex. So, this made Xianxia feel extremely depressed. The ninth Hell Cold Gale had given Xianxia a pleasant surprise as well, and it was that it could be attached to the Soulseek Sword technique. With the enhancement provided by it, the speed of the Soulseek Sword technique. Amongst profounders below the spirit realm, probably only the little fellow's teleportation was capable of avoiding it. In any case, even he couldn't accomplish that. Just like the Ghost Flame Sword formation, Xianxia had given a name to the wings formed by the ninth Hell Cold Gale. It was called the ninth Hell Sword Wings. In the last 2 months, his physical body had obtained a huge improvement from his painstaking cultivation. Even though it was inferior to Mo-Ku, it was absolutely not much inferior. In terms of sword techniques, the might of the Soulseek Sword technique, and especially when it was enhanced by the Nether Ghost Flame of ninth Hell Cold Gale, it was truly extremely terrifying. Moreover, the word Soulseek in the technique could be changed, and it should be called the Soul Reap Sword technique. Because once it was enhanced by the ninth Hell Cold Gale, then did it even have to seek and pursue someone with the speed it possessed? Could anyone beneath the spirit realm even accomplish that? Of course, the most important improvement was that he'd comprehended the sword domain, a domain of the sword. It had become his greatest trump card because he was a true overlord within the domain. In short, his strength had obtained a huge amount of improvement throughout this period of time. Or to be more precise, it had risen by a level. Right, his cultivation was actually on the verge of breaking through, but he'd forcefully suppressed it. Sometimes, it really wasn't advisable to allow one's cultivation to improve too quickly. However, Xianxia had another regret, and that was he lacked a sword. The hidden sword was really good, but it was slightly incapable of keeping up with his strength. For example, the hidden sword was slightly unable to endure the strain when both the Nether Ghost Flame and ninth Hell Cold Gale were attached to it. This caused him to feel slightly helpless. There was a very exaggerated saying in the Southern Territory, "If the sword is in the heart, then everything is a sword." These words seemed to make sense. However, in Xianxia's opinion, it was a pile of trash. If both parties possessed equal strengths, then it was obvious who the victor would be if a heaven-rank sword went up against a blade of grass. He could only put the matter of a better sword aside for now. After all, it wasn't that easy to find a suitable sword. The azure sword he once had wasn't bad, but the sword sect had unfortunately taken it from him. When he thought about the sword sect, a beautiful figure appeared in his mind. She wore white clothes, had a green sword, and was icy cold and silent. Xianxia. Xianxia recalled the promise from that day. After a short while, he shook his head and restrained his thoughts. Everything could only be realized by possessing sufficient strength, so just thinking about it was meaningless. With a command in his heart, he rose up into the sky while standing on his sword, and then he transformed into a ray of light that shot violently towards the horizon. He hadn't chosen to return to ancient Domain City, and he'd headed to the ninth hell instead. There were souls that could improve his sword intent and soul there, and he intended to improve his slaughter sword intent to the 7th level before the Hidden Dragon Pagoda was opened. Yes, he didn't possess full confidence in his ability to win in this place where monstrous geniuses gathered, the ancient battlefield. He wanted to get stronger and stronger. Xianxia was unaware that hell had been raised in ancient Domain City. The corpses of almost 5,000 human profounders were already hanging on the walls of ancient Domain City from Moku's bloody slaughter. What about Xianxia? He still hadn't made an appearance. This made numerous human profounders within the city to feel displeased, and then some of them formed small groups and started to search for Xianxia within the city. Why were they looking for Xianxia? It was naturally because they wanted Xianxia to face Moku. As for whether it was right or wrong, they naturally didn't think too much about it. They merely knew that Xianxia had infuriated Moku, and then Moku started to slaughter the human profounders, causing them to be unable to leave the city. Since they couldn't leave the city, they couldn't temper themselves. However, some profounders hadn't joined these groups. For example, some of the profounders from the Southern Territory, because they were clearly aware of what sort of person Xianxia was. When he went berserk, he was absolutely not inferior to Moku at all. Look for him? Actually, that was no different than courting death. However, they felt resentment towards Xianxia as well because Xianxia had caused them to be practically isolated from the other human profounders. It was even to the extent that some had suggested to toss them down the city wall to calm Moku's rage. Of course, it was absolutely impossible to accomplish if there wasn't anyone with strength and prestige to take the lead. Moreover, not a single one of the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory had made an appearance. On this day, a man that wore a violet robe appeared below the city. All the profounders on the city wall instantly shook their heads upon catching sight of him, and their eyes were filled with pity and ridicule. Isn't he courting death by coming to the city by himself at such a time? Under the gazes of a few hundred profounders of the devil race, the violet-robed man walked slowly towards ancient Domain City, and he didn't even spare a glance at those profounders from the devil race. One of the profounders from the devil race intended to attack when he saw the violet-robed man acting in such an arrogant manner. However, he was stopped by Moku. Right at this moment, the violet-robed man suddenly stopped moving, and then he turned to gaze at Moku before he said, "The number 1 genius of the devil race. Even the nether god's spear was subdued by you. Not bad, you didn't disappoint me. I hope you'll become stronger and stronger." As soon as he finished speaking, the violet-robed man chuckled lightly and turned around before he started walking towards the heaven entrance. He actually intends to pass through the heaven entrance, and he's actually doing it in front of all the members of the devil race. Who exactly is he? How courageous! When has such a genius appeared amongst us human profounders? He really is arrogant, and this really feels good. Those fellows from the devil race actually don't dare to act against him. Who exactly is he? Could he be the martial god of our human race? As he watched the violet-robed man walk slowly towards the heaven entrance, a youth from the devil race who stood by Moku's side had grunted coldly and said, "Big brother, why aren't we killing him? Why are we letting him act so arrogantly?" "Because he isn't human," Moku said in a low voice. "Since he isn't human, then there's no need to kill him. Even though I'm very annoyed by him as well, there's really no need to make enemies of everyone." That youth cried out involuntarily. "He isn't human?" He concealed it very well. "If I didn't have the—" When he spoke up to hear, Moku paused for a moment and said, "In short, he doesn't have the aura of a human. Alright, let's ignore him. Have the brothers within the city found Xianxia's whereabouts?" The youth shook his head slowly and said, "They haven't. Some saw him show himself at the treasure-gathering room. However, he seems to have vanished into thin air after leaving the treasure-gathering room. I've utilized all our forces, but we've still been unable to obtain any information about it. Could it be that it's really as those human profounders have said, and he has gone into hiding because he's afraid of us?" Moku shook his head and said, "He's a sword cultivator, and he's such a formidable sword cultivator as well. So, he wouldn't be afraid of us. As for why he hasn't shown himself, even I don't know the answer to that. However, we don't have to bother about that. Since he refuses to show himself, then we'll continue killing until he does. The blood of the brothers from my devil race can't be allowed to flow for nothing. It must be avenged with the blood of all the human profounders." Yes. Meanwhile, the violet-robed man had arrived in front of the heaven entrance, and he didn't hesitate to step into it. A ray of green light instantly flashed into appearance and arrived in front of him. With a flick of his finger, a strand of death energy that was fine like a snake had shot forward, and it collided with the ray of green light. Bang! The two of them instantly dispersed in midair. Swish! Another ray of green light flashed into appearance. The violet-robed man didn't dodge. He clenched his right fist tightly while threads of violet electricity flickered incessantly on his fist, and then he shouted loudly as he smashed his fist towards the ray of green light. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then the ray of light dispersed. Swish! Another ray of green light flashed into appearance. However, the violet-robed man had suddenly appeared in front of the ray of light at the exact instant that it appeared. After that, he swiftly stretched his right hand forward and grabbed. A claw that was comparable to an enormous dragon had suddenly appeared here, and then the ray of light was directly grabbed by the claw before it was suddenly clenched. Bang! The ray of light dispersed, and then a white-haired old man appeared before the violet-robed man. The white-haired man spoke in a low voice. "I never expected that even one of your race has come here." The violet-robed man grinned lightly, and then he bowed slightly to the white-haired old man before he strode into ancient Domain City. Previous chapter, the violet-robed man was naturally Luo Shui. His formidable display had definitely given the human profounders a boost of confidence because the humans didn't even a single expert who could go against Moku throughout this period of time. They'd been utterly humiliated by Moku's group, but they were helpless against it, and it made them feel truly aggrieved throughout this period. Now, a human expert had finally made an appearance. Right when they were filled with anticipation that this human expert would fight Moku, that human expert had just glanced indifferently at all the human profounders on the city wall before he shook his head and said, "Humans are still so useless. They really are a race that's just a waste of resources." Luo Shui's voice seemed to have been intentionally spread, and it was heard clearly by all the profounders in the surroundings. After that, their expressions instantly became colorful. Martial God Mountain. And Nanjing stood proudly within a hall, and there were 23 statues standing around her. These 23 statues were the 23 martial gods throughout the history of Profounder Continent. Every single one of them was a peerless expert who commanded great strength and authority, and besides that martial god who was from the same generation as the Sword Sect's founding ancestor, every single one of them was an extraordinarily monstrous genius who crushed all the other profounders of the same generation. It could be said that these experts represented the most formidable and strongest experts throughout the history of Profounder Continent. Of course, most importantly, these statues represented the inheritances of 23 martial gods. After all, there was something unique about every single martial god, and it could be said that possessing the inheritance of any one of them would be sufficient for one to reign supreme over the world. Of course, the precondition was that one possessed the qualifications and strength to receive their inheritances. And Nanjing swept the statues with her gaze, and then her gaze descended onto the statue that was right at the front of all the other statues in the hall. It was the statue that represented the first-generation martial god. Right at this moment, a practically ethereal middle-aged man suddenly floated out from within that statue. The middle-aged man wore a plain robe and had an extremely ordinary appearance. Only his eyes seemed to be like a boundless starry sky that was deep and vast, and he emanated an aura of mysteriousness and unfathomableness. A wisp of a gentle smile appeared on the corners of his mouth while he gazed at a Nanjing, and then he said, "Little girl, I've been paying attention to you since you started ascending Martial God Mountain. You're really not bad. Since your gaze descended onto me, you intend to choose to inherit my inheritance." And Nanjing looked the middle-aged man in the eye and said, "I mainly came here to tell you something and not to inherit the title of martial god." "Oh." The middle-aged man's smile grew wider as he said, "Interesting. I'm really curious about that. Please do tell." And Nanjing said, "In the end, inheritances are things that belong to others, and it doesn't belong to me. I and Nanjing don't need things that belong to others. I came to see you because I merely intended to tell you that I can rely on myself to attain the title of martial god just like you did." I'll become the strongest expert beneath this starry sky. As soon as she finished speaking, Nanjing turned around and walked towards the exit without the slightest hesitation. Right when Nanjing was about to walk out of the hall, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Little girl, is your objective merely to become the strongest beneath this starry sky?" Nanjing stopped when she heard this, and then she swiftly turned around to gaze at the middle-aged man while her eyes emanated a glow of excitement. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "The path of the martial Tao is boundless. Actually, to you and many other geniuses, having an objective is a type of shackle. If such a shackle is put around your thoughts, then your heart will be shackled as well. Do you understand?" After a short moment of deep thought, Nanjing bowed to the middle-aged man and said, "Thank you for the guidance. From this moment onward, I and Nanjing have no objective. I'll go as far as the path of the martial Tao is, and if there's an end to that path, then I'll make a new path until my life comes to an end." A wisp of praise flashed in his eyes as he said, "You're really not bad. You possess the heart of the strong at such a young age, and you've even comprehended 6 types of intents. Most importantly, you've even fused them together into a completely new intent, an intent that belongs solely to you. You're much more outstanding than I was all those years ago. In the last tens of thousands of years, only the unfettered one from all those years ago can compare to you in terms of natural talent." And Nanjing nodded and calmly accepted his praise before she said, "Senior, you know the Sword Sect's founding ancestor?" "Of course." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "He came here as well all those years ago. At that time, I thought he'd come to inherit my inheritance, but I never expected that he'd actually come to challenge me." "Challenge you?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "He was just like you. He disdained to take the path of another, and he felt even more disdain to obtain the strength and experiences of another. He wanted to take a path of his own. The objective he had for challenging me was merely to perfect his sword Tao. As for what happened after that, you should be aware of it." And Nanjing remained silent for a short while before she said, "Senior, both you and the Sword Sect's founding ancestor are existences with extraordinary strength. I'd like to know if all of you've perished." The smile on the corners of his mouth gradually disappeared, and then he gazed towards the distance and said, "Can anyone in the world avoid death?" His voice was faint and carried a wisp of helplessness, unwillingness, and resentment. After a short while, his gaze descended onto Nanjing again, and then he said, "There are a total of 23 inheritances here. I perfectly understand that you disdain to possess the strength of another. However, you can utilize the essence of these 23 inheritances to deduce new techniques, and you can utilize their combat experience to perfect your insufficiencies. The so-called inheritances here aren't inheritances where you obtain our strength, and it's to obtain what you need from us. Understand? Senior wants me to inherit the inheritances of all 23 martial gods?" And Nanjing was puzzled. After all, there had never been a single martial god throughout the history of Profounder Continent who had obtained the inheritances of all 23 martial gods. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Because these so-called inheritances of the martial gods will cease to exist after you. How much you're able to inherit will depend on your own fortune." As soon as he finished speaking, another 22 phantoms appeared here. At the 9th hell, Yang Yi was capturing the souls here like a madman, and then he consumed them and started hunting again. In the period of a few days, he felt that his slaughter sword intent had arrived at its peak, and he merely needed a critical factor in order to step foot into the 7th level of slaughter sword intent. After he devoured one of the souls, Yang Yi was about to continue searching for more. However, right at this moment, a black shadow suddenly appeared behind Yang Yi, and that shadow bowed to Yang Yi and said, "Sword Master, I've finally found you." Yang Yi turned around to look at this person. He knew this person as Lu Xian. Lu Xian's strength was merely inferior to Lang Jun and Lang Yin, and he'd been sent to keep an eye on the movement of those monstrous geniuses in the ancient battlefield. "Do you need something?" said Yang Yi. Lu Xian nodded and said, "Sword Master, a major incident occurred in ancient Domain City lately. After that, Lu Xian slowly explained what Moku had been doing outside ancient domain city. After a short while, Yang Yi nodded and said, "All right, I understand. You can leave." Lu Xian was stunned when he heard this. And then he said, "Sword Master, could it be that you're going to allow Moku to continue acting arrogantly? Of course, I have no intention of putting any blame on you. It's just that Moku and those fellows from the devil race are truly too arrogant, and they even boasted about killing you." So, Yang Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not refusing to go there because I'm afraid of Moku. It's because it isn't necessary. I'm not that free. As for their actions of killing human profounders, that isn't related to me at all. Who can they blame for being killed because they are weak? As for the opinion of those other human profounders, there's no need to pay attention to them at all. If they truly infuriate me, then not to mention Moku, I'll even annihilate them myself." Lu Xian's heart turned cold. Now, he finally remembered what sort of person this sword master of his was. This was a person that killed without batting an eyelid. That day, this sword master of his had even killed a few of his companions from the League of Doom because of their differing opinion. Lu Xian shook his head and bowed to Yang Yi. After that, he hesitated for a moment and said, "Sword Master, Moku seems to have found those profounders from the Southern Territory who killed those fellows from the devil race with you. He has mobilized his forces in ancient domain city and started to act against them. Even though it's impossible to attack and kill within the city, but it's extremely easy for them to torture these profounders from the Southern Territory." Yang Yi frowned when he heard this, and then he said, "Gather everyone and return to ancient domain city." He didn't care about the fate of the other human profounders. However, he had to care about the fate of those profounders from the Southern Territory who'd killed those profounders of the devil race and nether race with him on that day. After all, they could be said to be his companions in battle. Moreover, he'd promised that he would lead them up into the hidden dragon pagoda. Even though he was no gentleman, he was still responsible for the words he'd spoken. He wasn't afraid of Moku, but he wouldn't underestimate Moku and the profounders of the devil race as well. So, he was prepared to utilize this group of assassins that were under his command. Of course, he wouldn't reveal their existence unless he had no other choice. After all, they could be considered to be a trump card of his as well, and he'd merely summoned them for safety's sake. Lu Xian instantly revealed an excited expression when he heard Yang Yi. He'd been unable to stand the sight of Moku and the profounders from the devil race for a long time, and he just hadn't acted because he didn't have Yang Ye's order. Otherwise, he would have started assassinating them a long time ago. Now, he finally had no need to continue exercising forbearance, and he could annihilate these profounders from the devil race. Outside ancient domain city, a few dozen profounders from the Southern Territory were restrained before the entrance to the city. They were from that group of profounders who'd killed the profounders from the devil race with Yang Yi on that day. They were originally residing within the city. Unfortunately, Moku had actually challenged the heaven entrance and succeeded in order to force them out of the city, because he'd instantly obtained a huge amount of special privileges upon overcoming the heaven entrance. One of those special privileges was the ability to kick out profounders who'd entered the city through the mortal entrance and dog entrance. Unfortunately, all of these profounders from the Southern Territory just happened to conform to these standards. This time, Moku didn't waste his breath at all, and he directly said, "Kill!" However, right at this moment, a ray of violet light flashed through the horizon, and then a figure descended forcefully onto the entrance of the city. "I heard that you are looking for me?" Yang Yi gazed indifferently at Moku while holding his sword in hand, and he had an indifferent expression on his face. The profounders on the city wall erupted into an uproar when they saw Yang Yi. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually dare to make an appearance. Moreover, he'd even come here on his own. As far as they were concerned, Yang Yi should hide like a tortoise forever. After all, the strength of Moku and those profounders from the devil race wasn't something that Yang Yi could go against. They hadn't imagined that Yang Yi would choose to show himself. When those captive profounders from the Southern Territory saw Yang Yi, they were truly touched, and their excitement could be seen in their eyes. Obviously, They hadn't imagined that Yang Yi would show himself for their sakes. Emoka's eyes narrowed when he saw Yang Yi, and the killing intent within his eyes was seemingly material while strands of devil energy couldn't help but surge out from his body. Right at this moment, 10 black shadows suddenly appeared by the side of those profounders from the devil race that stood by the side of the captive profounders from the southern territory. And then over 10 strands of blood sprayed. Those 10 black shadows were extremely swift. They'd slit the necks of those profounders of the devil race in less than 2 breaths of time. After they rescued those profounders from the southern territory, the figures of those 10 black shadows shook before they vanished simultaneously on the spot. It was like they'd never appeared here. Those profounders from the southern territory weren't stupid. They immediately ran over and stood behind Yang Yi, and then they withdrew their dark treasures while they stared angrily at the profounders from the devil race. Emoku was utterly infuriated when he saw his brothers from the devil race being assassinated right before his eyes. He roared furiously before the nether god's spear emanated a strand of devil energy as it shot explosively towards Yang Yi. At the same time, his figure followed closely behind it. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly while a wisp of a ruthless expression flashed in his eyes. His wrist moved slightly before his sword left a string of afterimages behind as he swiftly slashed it in a downward motion towards the spear. Bang! As soon as his sword collided with the nether god's spear, it instantly exploded into countless pieces. Yang Yi frowned. He hadn't expected that the nether god's spear would actually be so terrifying. Right at this moment, Emoku had arrived behind the spear, and then he stretched his hand out to grab a hold of it. After that, he launched a swift and spinning thrust towards Yang Ye's chest. Yang Yi didn't dare act carelessly at all. The tip of his foot spun on the ground as his figure flashed to the side and avoided this attack. After that, he suddenly stomped the back of his foot against the ground, and his figure shot forward explosively. He instantly arrived in front of Emoku. He shouted loudly as he blasted his fist towards Emoku's chest, and his right fist caused a string of explosions as the air was torn apart along its path. A wisp of disdain flashed through Emoku's eyes when he saw Yang Yi approach him and even use his fists, because Emoku felt that Yang Yi was truly overestimating his strength by utilizing his fist against him. Emoku clenched his left hand into a fist, and then he didn't hesitate to blast it towards Yang Ye's fist. Bang! A heavy bang resounded as their fists collided. Emoku frowned as soon as he came into contact with Yang Ye's fist because Yang Ye's strength was actually formidable to the point of making him feel pain. The formidable strengths they possessed caused their figures to separate. But in the next moment, their figures charged forward explosively again. This time, Emoku didn't utilize the nether god's spear, and he started to use his fists instead. He smashed his fist forward in a simple and direct manner. However, the strength carried by his fist was shocking. Everywhere it passed, even space shook before it. It wasn't flashy or stunning at all, and it was just the purest form of strength. Yang Yi didn't choose to avoid this attack. His violet, profound energy surged out, and then a violet glow flashed on his fist. He pulled his right fist backward, and then suddenly blasted it forward to collide with Emoku's fist. Bang! As soon as they came into contact, a strand of terrifying energy suddenly swept out from their fists, and this force caused both of them to swiftly move backward. Emoku had moved 12 steps back while Yang Yi had moved 13 steps back. The profounders from the devil race were stunned upon witnessing this scene, because a human profounder had actually matched Emoku equally in terms of physical strength. After all, even the physical body of Yinglong, who was from the dragon race, couldn't compare to Emoku's physical body. The profounders on the walls of the city were silent. Their eyes were similarly filled with shock and disbelief while they gazed at Yang Yi. After all, most of them had witnessed the battle between Emoku and Yang Yi on that day. At that time, Yang Ye's physical body was far inferior to Emoku. Yang Yi has actually become so terrifying after just a few months of time. Many people recalled how they'd actually thought of capturing Yang Yi, and their bodies instantly couldn't help but shudder. What a joke! Going to capture Yang Yi was simply like courting death. You cultivated the heavenly devil physique successfully. Emoku gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You really surprised me." because you were actually able to cultivate it to such an extent in such a short period of time. However, you're still going to die. Those who kill members of my devil race must die." As soon as he finished speaking, strands of devil energy seeped out from Emoku's body. These strands of devil energy seeped out incessantly before forming a large and black hound above Emoku. The hound was around 30 m tall and 25 m wide. Its fist-sized eyes were suffused with a horrifying glow, while its claws were suffused with a ghastly cold light that caused others to shudder with fear. Most importantly, the hound's body was covered in strands of black devil energy. These strands of devil energy seemed as if they were alive, and they ceaselessly circled the hound. It was an extremely bizarre sight. Its big brother's familiar. The devil profounders cried out involuntarily when they saw the hound. Besides the devil profounders, there were beings similar to dark beasts that lived in the devil territory. These beings were called devil beasts. Devil beasts were even more terrifying than dark beasts, because they were extremely cruel, and they were willing to kill their own kind in order to survive. It was even to the extent they killed other devil beasts which were part of their immediate family. Moreover, the concept of the stronger being respected was even more vividly and bluntly displayed in the world of devil beasts, because those without strength would definitely be eaten. So, the strength and cruelness of these devil beasts that had grown up in such an environment were utterly unimaginable to ordinary people. After the devil hound appeared, it glanced at Emoku first, and a trace of fear appeared in its eyes. In next to no time, its gaze descended onto Xianxia, and then fear in its eyes instantly transformed into bloodthirstiness, greed, and desire. It howled furiously before it leaped up and smashed down forcefully like a small hill towards Xianxia. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the enormous hound that covered his field of vision smashing down towards him. A sword appeared in his grasp with a flip of his wrist, and then the profound energy within his body surged into the sword. When the hound was merely around 3 m away from him, Xianxia suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he relied on the counterforce to shoot into the air like a ray of light. Xianxia's brows suddenly knit together when the tip of his sword came into contact with the enormous hound's belly, because he noticed that he seemed to have underestimated its defenses. He didn't hesitate to utilize his 6th-level sword intent, and then he suddenly twisted the sword in his hand. Hiss! A light sound resounded, and then Xianxia pierced through the hound's belly along with his sword and shot into the sky. The black hound crashed to the ground. However, to everyone's astonishment, it actually hadn't died. Moreover, the hole created by Xianxia's sword was actually slowly closing from being repaired by the strands of black energy. After he descended to the ground, Xianxia frowned as he gazed at the hound that was completely fine, and he said, "It's fine." Meanwhile, Emoku suddenly said, "It won't die so long as I'm still alive. We formed a contract that shares our lives." "Is that so?" Xianxia's brows raised, and then he said, "Then I'll have to give it a try." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's figure flashed, and he instantly arrived in front of the hound. After that, his sword left a string of afterimages behind as he stabbed it towards the devil hound. Moreover, when the tip of his sword was about to come into contact with the hound, a strand of flame had silently appeared there. Hiss! Xianxia laughed lightly as his sword pierced through the hound's belly without the slightest obstruction. After that, the hound suddenly let out a heartrending and furious howl, and its howl was filled with shock and terror. Right when Emoku and the other devil profounders were puzzled, it suddenly exploded apart, and a strand of fire had flashed at the instant it exploded. After that, the hound was instantly transformed into ash. Xianxia sheathed his sword before he turned around to gaze at Emoku, who had a slightly unsightly expression. He said, "Didn't you say it couldn't be killed? Look, isn't it dead?" Emoku didn't flare up, and his expression became extremely solemn instead. He said, "How exactly did you kill it? Don't you think that's a very stupid question?" Xianxia chuckled and said, "Since you were looking for me, I came. You want to kill me but seem to be unable to do so. On the other hand, I know my limits, and I know that I'm absolutely not confident in my ability to kill you for now. However, I have absolute confidence in being able to kill those members of your devil race that are standing by your side. Do you want to die? Emoku flipped his palm, and then the nether god's spear appeared in his grasp. After that, a terrifying, imposing aura suddenly swept out from within him. You don't believe me? Then I'll let you see for yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in Xianxia's hand suddenly left his grasp, and it transformed into a ray of light that shot explosively towards a youth by Emoku's side. With the boost provided by his 6th-level sword intent, violet profound energy, and a strength talisman, the speed of this attack was extremely swift. In an instant, it had arrived before the youth, and the latter's expression changed violently. He didn't hesitate to flash to the side with the intent of dodging this attack. However, as soon as he'd flashed to the side, the attack had flashed along with him as well. After that, it pierced through his neck beneath his puzzled and astounded gaze. Hiss! A strand of fresh blood sprayed out, and this youth from the devil race was dead. Emoku was furious. Meanwhile, Xianxia smiled and said, Do you know? I didn't have any intent to go against your devil race and the nether race. Unfortunately, both your races just had to try to kill me outside the city that day. Forget it. Since it's like that, then I'll send all of you to your graves first. As soon as he finished speaking, a pitch-black chain had pierced through space and instantly arrived before Xianxia's neck. Xianxia's expression remained calm, and he laughed coldly as he suddenly slashed with his sword. Bang! A muffled bang resounded, and the chain was instantly blasted backward by Xianxia's formidable strength. Meanwhile, Han Yu suddenly appeared by Emoku's side. He made a gesture and the chain instantly flew back into his grasp, and then he gazed at Xianxia with undisguised icy-cold killing intent in his eyes. It's impossible to kill him by yourself without utilizing all your trump cards. The hidden dragon pagoda hasn't been opened, so it isn't the time to expose all of that. So we'll join forces, said Han Yu in a gloomy voice. Emoku hesitated for a moment before he nodded. Right when the two of them were about to attack, the swords within the possession of all the profounders both on the city wall and outside it had suddenly started to tremble violently. After that, they struggled free from the grasps of their owners and transformed into rays of light that shot into the sky before they fell back to the ground. It was a display of submission. All swords submit before the Sword Emperor. Under the myriad of gazes of anticipation that were coming from the surroundings, a woman in a green dress had slowly appeared within everyone's fields of vision. She had a single arm, and she held a black ancient sheath in her left hand. Xianxia's brows knit together tightly upon seeing her because it was none other than Mo Qingyu, who he's chopped an arm off from on that day. He hadn't expected that she'd actually become the Sword Emperor. His gaze descended onto the ancient sheath in her hand, and then his heart shook. That's probably the mysterious ancient sheath that Elder Mu spoke about. Mo Qingyu's gaze descended onto Xianxia, and then she slowly walked over towards him. As she walked towards him, the swords throughout the surroundings started to tremble even more violently, and it was like they'd encountered some sort of terrifying thing. According to the rumors, the sword can't be utilized in front of the Sword Emperor. Looks like this rumor is true. Luo Shui watched this scene from somewhere within the city, and he chuckled before he glanced at Xianxia and said, An extraordinary genius in the Sword Dao against the Sword Emperor. Haha, it's really getting more and more interesting. Emoku and Han Yu didn't choose to attack, because they wanted to see how Xianxia would deal with the Sword Emperor. Do you still remember? Mo Qingyu walked towards Xianxia as she said, that I said I would repay you 100-fold for severing my arm? Before Xianxia could answer, she continued, I was careless that day, and it allowed you to sever my arm from a surprise attack with a natural treasure. That's the greatest humiliation in my entire lifetime. However, I have to thank you because it allowed me to be reborn and attain the 8th level of sword intent. That was what gave me the chance to head to Sword Emperor Mountain and obtain the acknowledgement of the ancient sheath. And then, you came to look for me? Xianxia smiled while his eyes didn't reveal even a shred of fear. Yes. Mo Qingyu nodded and said, You severed my arm that day, so I'll sever all your limbs today. What do you think? Xianxia shrugged and said, Then what are you waiting for? It just so happens that I want to see exactly how formidable the so-called Sword Emperor is. As you wish. As soon as she spoke, Mo Qingyu's wrist shook slightly, and then a ray of green light flashed out from the ancient sheath. In the next moment, Yang Ye's pupils constricted violently because a hole had appeared on his left shoulder. The hole was a few centimeters deep, and if it wasn't for his formidable physical defense, then just this attack alone would have probably caused his left arm to be severed from his body. So this is the might of her 8th level sword intent, wind intent, and the ancient sheath. If she merely possessed 8th level sword intent and wind intent, then it would be absolutely impossible for him to suffer this strike without being able to react at all. In other words, the ancient sheath had definitely provided some sort of assistance. Mo Qingyu frowned and said, I never expected that your physical body had actually attained such a level. How surprising. However, it's fine as well. This will make it even more interesting. As soon as she finished speaking, another ray of green light flashed. Right when it was about to come into contact with Yang Ye's left knee, a ray of violet light flashed and struck the ray of green light, causing both to instantly disperse into the air. Mo Qingyu exclaimed lightly with surprise and said, You're actually able to block it. Ha ha. Yang Yi roared with laughter. He laughed for a short while before he shook his head and said, Mo Qingyu, it looks like your confidence has really swelled to an impossible height upon becoming the so-called Sword Emperor. He wasn't able to react to it on the first time because he wasn't on guard against it, and he'd been taken by surprise. The reason he was able to block it on the second time was naturally because he'd utilized the enlightened sword heart and sword domain. While it was beneath his sword domain, he would be able to block her attack even if her attacks were 10 times faster. You've really surprised me. Mo Qingyu said, even a spirit realm expert wouldn't be able to block an attack enhanced by 8th level sword intent and 8th level wind intent. Yet you were able to accomplish it with ease. Looks like I've been underestimating you since the beginning. Yang Yi laughed coldly. He couldn't be bothered to waste his breath on her. He tightened his grasp on his sword before a ray of violet light shot forward explosively. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of Mo Qingyu's mouth when she saw Yang Yi attack. She didn't take any action, and she just stood there and allowed Yang Ye's sword chi to arrive in front of her. Right when it around 1 away from here, the ancient sheath in her grasp had suddenly trembled lightly, and then Yang Ye's sword chi was directly absorbed by it under the astounded and puzzled gazes of everyone in the surroundings. After that, there was no further sign of Yang Ye's attack. A solemn expression appeared in Yang Ye's eyes because the ancient sheath was even more mysterious and shocking than he'd imagined. It was actually able to absorb sword chi. Utilizing the sword before the Sword Emperor is truly stupid beyond compare. Meanwhile, Han Yu, who was watching the battle from the side, had suddenly said, Yang Yi, don't you know that the ancient sheath is extremely deterring towards sword cultivators? No matter if it's the sword chi, or even sword techniques, they'll be forcefully suppressed in front of the ancient sheath. All swords submit before the Sword Emperor. Did you think it was a joke? Yang Yi glanced indifferently at Han Yu and said, This is a matter between humans. What does it have to do with someone like you who's neither man nor monster? You're courting death. Han Yu was furious and he was about to attack. However, Mo Qingyu suddenly said, He's mine. I'll kill anyone who touches him. As soon as she finished speaking, she glanced coldly at Han Yu. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Han Yu laughed coldly and said, Even though Yang Yi isn't really a great person, I have to say that his words from before really make sense. Do you really think you're invincible just because you've become the Sword Emperor? Do you think you're the Sword Sect's founding ancestor from all those years ago? Why don't you give it a try? Mo Qingyu spoke in a cold voice. Han Yu was about to attack when Mo stopped him. Mo shook his head and said, This is a battle between sword cultivators. We don't have to interfere. Even I'm able to restrain myself. Could it be that you can't? Han Yu was still displeased. However, he didn't try to attack again, and he just glanced coldly at Yang Yi and Mo Qingyu. You still intend to fight? I'll let you attack 3 times. Otherwise, you might not have the chance to attack. Mo Qingyu spoke indifferently as she gazed at Yang Yi. Yang Yi nodded, and then he took a deep breath. Needless to say, the ancient sheath was truly extremely abnormal. Because anything related to the sword seemed to be unable to do anything to Mo Qingyu. Moreover, he was able to sense that his sword had completely lost its aura when facing the ancient sheath, and it actually had the intent to submit. At the same time that he felt aggrieved by this, Yang Yi felt quite helpless as well. Fortunately, the sword domain seemed to remain unaffected by it. Yang Yi didn't speak further and strode slowly towards Mo Qingyu. When he arrived around 30 m in front of Mo Qingyu, Yang Yi slowly closed his eyes. Right when he was about to utilize the sword domain, a strand of roaring laughter had suddenly resounded from the horizon. Yang Yi frowned and raised his head to look over, and he saw an enormous golden dragon formed from energy was swimming over from the distant horizon. Bang! The golden dragon crashed to the ground and dispersed, and then a man in a golden robe appeared before everyone. It was none other than Mu Jun, whom Yang Yi had fought with on that day. Mu Jun held the golden dragon seal in his hand while he glanced at Mo Qingyu, and then a wisp of a solemn expression flashed through his eyes upon noticing the ancient sheath in her hand. After that, he turned to look at Yang Yi and said, "We hadn't decided on a victor in the battle that day. How about we have a fight today?" Meanwhile, Mo Qingyu said in a low voice, "His life is mine." Mu Jun laughed coldly and said, "But you weren't able to kill him, right? So, allow me to take his life instead. All right?" "No." Mo Qingyu refused and said, "I'd said that I would make him pay 100-fold for severing my arm, so how could I go back on my word? Moreover, this is a battle between sword cultivators, so you shouldn't interfere." Mu Jun frowned when he heard this. Right when he was about to say something, Moku had suddenly spoken from the side. "Humans always love to waste their breath. Are all of you going to kill him or not? I'll do it myself if the two of you aren't doing it, and you can just watch from the side. All right? Hee hee." Han Yu laughed gloomily and said, "Why don't you allow me to do it? After all, the soul of a sword cultivator is extremely nourishing. It's rare to come by in 100 years. All of you don't have to fight." Right at this moment, Yang Yi had suddenly spoken. "Oh!" Mu Jun's brows raised, and he said, "What?" Yang Yi paid no attention to Mu Jun. He turned around to gaze at the profounders from the Southern Territory who were standing behind him, and he said, "All of you return to the city." Even though most of them possessed fairly good strengths, they would only be giving their lives away by staying here, and it was completely meaningless. "We refuse to leave." All of them shook their heads and had firm expressions in their hearts. Yang Ye's heart felt warm as he chuckled lightly and said, "You'll only be distractions to me by staying here. Returning to the city is the greatest help you can give me. Understand?" All of them fell silent. Even though they didn't want to leave, they had to admit that they would only burden Yang Yi by staying. But they really didn't want to leave right now. Most of them were loyal, because Yang Yi had disregarded the threat Moku and the others from the devil race had posed to him in order to rescue them. So how could they not be moved by this? Moreover, the profounders from the Southern Territory hadn't just offended the members of the devil race, nether race, and demon race. They'd offended the experts of the other territories as well. If they didn't hold tightly onto someone like Yang Yi for support, then it would still be death that awaited them. "Go back." Yang Yi spoke once more. All of them exchanged glances before they bowed to Yang Yi. One of them said, "Yang Yi, you must survive. We'll be awaiting your safe return within the city. If you die, then we brothers will definitely try our best to kill the profounders of the devil race until all of us perish." As soon as he finished speaking, they stopped hesitating and returned to the city. Moku, Mo Qingyu, and the others watched coldly as this happened, and they didn't stop those profounders from leaving. Indeed, they only had a single objective right now, and it was Yang Yi. As for those small fries, they really didn't feel like paying any attention to them. After those profounders from the Southern Territory had gone back into the city, Yang Yi took a deep breath before he turned around. His gaze swept past Moku, Han Yu, Mu Jun, and Mo Qingyu before a savage expression suddenly appeared on his face. He said, "All of you don't have to fight, and you can just come at me together." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's figure flashed, and he arrived with 30 of them. After that, a strand of flame suddenly appeared and the temperature in the surroundings instantly became burning. At the same time, 200 swords shot into the sky while strands of flame instantly attached themselves to those swords. In an instant, the expressions of everyone in the surroundings had changed. The 200 swords that carried strands of nether ghost flame had formed a completely round sword formation in midair. Surging waves of fire and terrifying sword intent swept out incessantly from them. At this moment, the glow of this sword formation simply surpassed the scorching sun in the sky. All members of the devil race, retreat. Members of the nether race, retreat. At practically the exact same time, Moku and Hun Yu shouted in succession, and their voices carried a trace of obvious anxiousness. This clearly showed how cautious they were towards Yang Ye's sword formation, and it could even be described as fear. A wisp of solemnness flashed through Mo Qingyu's eyes as she gazed at the sword formation in the sky. If it was merely just a sword formation, then she wouldn't react in such a way even if it was enhanced by 6th level slaughter sword intent. However, it was enhanced by a natural treasure. The effect of her ancient sheath wasn't that effective against a natural treasure. Mo Qingyu took a deep breath before strands of violet gales appeared around her. These gales grew faster and faster while her figure grew fainter and fainter. In the end, it was like she'd fused into one with the gales, and she'd vanished on the spot. At the same time, rays of green light appeared around the violent gales. It wasn't just Mo Qingyu who reacted in such a way. Even Mu Jun revealed a solemn expression right now. He was similarly unafraid of the sword formation but the nether ghost flame instead. This natural treasure was naturally not unfamiliar to him. If it wasn't for the mortal emperor seal, then he would have probably been burnt to ash by it. Now, this natural treasure was enhancing a sword formation along with 6th level slaughter sword intent. So to what extent had the sword formations might been improved? When he thought up to here, the mortal emperor seal in his hand started to spin swiftly, and then strands of golden light lit up within it. At the same time, 9 golden energy dragons charged out from within Mu Jun, and then they circled around in the sky above Mu Jun. Moku and Hun Yu didn't waste time at all. After they ordered their companions to retreat, the two of them gazed at the sword formation with a solemn expression as well, and then black energy and devil energy surged out from within them. At this moment, Yang Ye's eyes were crimson red while sharp slaughter sword intent raged around him. He gazed at Moku, Mo Qingyu, and the others with a savage expression as he said, "All of you want to kill me? Then bring it on." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword formation in the sky descended rapidly. The expressions of Moku and the others changed. They stopped hesitating and executed their respective techniques. Bang! The sword formation descended, and then an enormous bang resounded through the surroundings. Countless waves of fire swept swiftly below ancient domain city. Everywhere it passed, the ground was scorched black while numerous enormous rifts were ceaselessly appearing on the ground. The impetus of this aftershock was extremely shocking. As they gazed at Moku and the others who were drowned beneath the waves of fire and ocean of fire, the crowd on the city walls was deathly silent. All of them were dumbstruck, and their eyes were filled with shock. Was this really caused by a king realm profounder? My God! Even a peak spirit realm expert would probably be unable to accomplish this. Was Yang Yi actually so terrifying? No matter what, Yang Ye's name was bound to spread throughout the continent after this battle. Luo Shui's eyes narrowed slightly while a solemn expression was within them as well. He said in a low voice, "The nether ghost flame. It's ranked at the 4th position amongst fire element natural treasure. I never expected that it would actually be in his possession. How surprising!" Below the city, the wave of fire dispersed and an enormous and deep pit that was around 300 m in both length and width had appeared within the shocked gazes of everyone. The deep pit was over 100 m deep, and it was an expanse of pitch black within it. Countless specks of flame were still burning within it, and it was like an enormous pit of fire. Where were Moku and the others? They were naturally within the pit, and they could be said to be in an extremely miserable state. Their faces were painted black with ash and their clothes were tattered. Especially Mo Qingyu, large patches of her snow-white skin was exposed. Of course, most importantly, none of them were standing right now. At this moment, their expressions could be said to be extremely unsightly. Even though they'd utilized their trump cards to resist this terrifying attack, they displayed such a sorry state in front of countless people. Moreover, the greatest humiliation of it all was that it was a single person who'd done this to all of them, especially Mo Qingyu. As the Sword Emperor, she'd actually been reduced to such a sorry state by a sword cultivator. This could be said to be an extraordinary humiliation to her. So, her pale face was savage to a slightly terrifying extent, and it was quite horrifying. However, right at this moment, those 200 swords that had pierced into the ground had suddenly shot up into the sky. Moreover, a small ball of flame had shot into the sky along with these 200 swords. When they witnessed this scene, the eyelids of Mo Ku and the others twitched. Again, Yang Yi was going to attack again, of course. Yang Yi raised his arms as he stood at the border of the deep pit, and he attached the nether ghost flame onto the 200 swords. He was originally only capable of executing this sword formation a single time. After all, his profound energy wasn't that abundant. However, Yang Yi had been utterly infuriated this time. Since these fellows wanted to kill him, he felt that he might as well kill them to his heart's content. After he utilized the Ghost Flame sword formation for the first time, Yang Yi had absorbed a top-grade energy stone, and its effect allowed his profound energy to recover at an insane speed. Even though it hadn't fully recovered the profound energy within his tiny vortex, his profound energy was already sufficient to utilize the Ghost Flame sword formation again. Even if the Ghost Flame sword formation was unable to kill these fellows, Yang Yi wanted them to suffer heavy injuries at the very least. The enormous sword formation revolved in the sky while countless sparks shot towards the surroundings, and the glow of fire blotted out the sky and made it seem like the end of the world was arriving. The swords were spinning at high speed while slaughter sword intent and flames ceaselessly shot out from within them, causing it to seem extremely shocking. The solemn gazes of Mo Ku and the others who were within the pit carried a trace of rage as well. Does he really think we're like ripe persimmons that he can squash at will? For the sake of concealing their strength, they hadn't chosen to reveal all their trump cards as Yang Yi had. After all, their true objective was the karmic luck in the hidden dragon pagoda. However, Yang Yi was going too far now, so... Bang! Mu Jun suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot and shot into the sky, and then an enormous golden energy dragon suddenly flickered into appearance and roamed around his body. Mu Jun shouted loudly while being covered by the enormous dragon, and he tossed the mortal emperor seal upward. The seal expanded in midair and instantly transformed into an enormous dragon-shaped seal that was 300 m wide and over 300 m long. Yang Yi, do you really think you're invincible? Mu Jun's pale face carried a trace of a savage expression as he gazed at Yang Yi and said in a low voice, "A natural treasure? Humph. Let me, Mu Jun, see if your natural treasure or my mortal emperor seal is stronger." Meanwhile, a whistling sound from air being torn apart resounded. Mo Ku held the nether god's spear in his hand as he shot into the sky, and he pointed it at Yang Yi from afar. He said, "I originally intended to slowly torture you to death, but now it would seem like it isn't necessary." As soon as he finished speaking, numerous pitch-black, shiny, and mysterious scales suddenly appeared on Mo Ku's body. In less than a breath of time, these scales had covered his entire body besides his eyes. "His life is mine." Meanwhile, a furious howl resounded from within the pit. Everyone looked over and saw Mo Qingyu shoot into the sky while rays of green light flickered incessantly around her. After she flew out of the pit, she raised the ancient sheath up high before she suddenly shouted, "Gather!" As soon as she spoke, besides the 200 swords that were under Yang Ye's control, the swords of all the other profounders had let out a sword howl before they transformed into rays of light that entered into the ancient sheath. After 2 breaths of time that were spent in silence, an enormous green-colored energy sword had suddenly flashed out from within the ancient sheath, The enormous sword was more than 100 m long, 30 m wide, and extremely condensed as if it was a material sword. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly as he gazed at the enormous sword. With a command in his heart, the 200 sword in midair had instantly overlapped together to form an actual sword that wasn't inferior to the green energy sword. At the same time, a thumb-sized ball of flame attached itself to the enormous sword. In an instant, the flame enveloped the entire sword, causing a flaming sword to appear. "Go!" Xiangyi commanded in a cold voice. The flaming sword suddenly started spinning, causing countless sparks to shoot towards the surroundings, and then it suddenly shot down violently. The green energy sword shot forward explosively as well. Under the astounded gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the two enormous swords collided with a bang. Bang! In an instant, an enormous explosion resounded through the 9 heavens, while layer upon layer of terrifying waves of energy and fire swept swiftly towards the surroundings. The expanse of space there even started to warp under the impact of the terrifying waves of fire and energy. These waves instantly enveloped both Yang Yi and Mo Qingyu. Right when everyone was shocked by this scene, a violet ray of light had suddenly flashed amidst the waves of fire and energy, and then it was like these waves were a rage that had been sliced apart with a sharp blade. An enormous rift was instantly split apart amidst them, and then Yang Yi appeared before everyone while holding his sword in hand. At this moment, Yang Ye's eyes were crimson red while violent slaughter sword intent was raging around him incessantly. It caused the air around him to be ceaselessly sliced apart and minced into pieces. A strand of fine flame was moving around his sword like a little fairy, and it caused that sword to reveal a shocking fiery red color. To the surprise of everyone, Yang Yi was actually completely unharmed by the terrifying waves of fire and energy. Yang Yi was naturally fine. The reason for that was because he'd utilized the sword domain when the waves of energy and fire were about to strike him, and he'd blocked them off with the sword domain. He'd merely utilized it for less than a breath of time, and coupled with the cover provided by the waves of fire and energy, no one had noticed his sword domain. What about Mo Qingyu? At this moment, she was already over 100 m away, and she was in a much more terrible state when compared to Yang Yi. Strands of violent wind were ceaselessly spinning around her, while the black ancient sheath was even held in front of her, and it was emanating rays of light to block off the wave of fire and energy for her. However, even then, she was still affected by it, and her face, arm, and skin were completely red. It was like they'd been cooked. Obviously, it was caused by the nether ghost flame. A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of Yang Ye's mouth while he gazed at her, and then his figure flashed and instantly arrived in front of Mo Qingyu. However, right at this moment, the ancient sheath had suddenly struggled free from Mo Qingyu's grasp and shot violently towards Yang Yi. The ancient sheath had a spirit of its own, and it was protecting its master on its own. A wisp of a vicious expression flashed in Yang Ye's eyes when he saw the ancient sheath trying to protect her, and then he shouted furiously, "Fuck off!" As soon as he spoke, the nether ghost flame transformed into a ray of fiery light that enveloped the ancient sheath. While the nether ghost flame was keeping the ancient sheath busy, Yang Ye's figure flashed and instantly arrived in front of Mo Qingyu. Mo Qingyu's expression changed and intended to attack. However, right at this moment, an invisible and terrifying force suddenly enveloped her. Mo Qingyu felt like an invisible shackle had coiled around her when she was beneath the effect of this force, and her strength and even soul had been forcefully suppressed. Moreover, it was actually impossible to utilize her sword intent while being enveloped by this terrifying force. Right at this moment, a ray of light pierced through her chest, and then Mo Qingyu's eyes opened wide. She opened her mouth and seemed to wish to say something. However, she wasn't able to say anything. After he put his sword away, Yang Yi glanced indifferently at her before he said, "So, the so-called Sword Emperor is actually so weak." All the spectators in the surroundings were flabbergasted. The Sword Emperor has died just like that? The Sword Emperor that appears every few thousand years has died just like that? She even died at the hands of a sword cultivator? Isn't it said that all swords submit before the Sword Emperor? All of them were puzzled. extremely puzzled by the scene before them. Right at this moment, the ancient sheath that was locked in combat with the nether ghost flame had erupted with a strand of dazzling and resplendent light, and then a sword howl resounded through the 9 heavens. The ancient sheath transformed into a slightly ethereal woman in a white dress. The woman glanced at Yang Yi with a complicated expression, and then her figure flashed to Imo Qingyu. She sighed lightly as she gazed at the hole on Imo Qingyu's chest, and then her fair hand moved slightly while strands of green energy surged towards the hole. The spectators in the surroundings instantly revealed solemn expressions when they saw this woman in a white dress. It was common knowledge that the ancient sheath had a spirit. They had never laid eyes on it in the past, but they had now. None of them dared to look down upon that woman because she was a peerless expert that had accompanied all those who were called the Sword Emperor. Yang Yi frowned when he saw the ancient sheath spirit saving Imo Qingyu, and he gestured with his right hand, causing the nether ghost flame to instantly appear in his palm. Yang Yi was just about to attack. However, the woman stopped and turned around to gaze at Yang Yi. Her eyes carried complicated emotions as she said, "6th level slaughter sword intent. The enlightened sword heart, 2 natural treasures. And you've comprehended the laws of domain. Why did you not come to Sword Emperor Mountain?" The woman seemed to have done it on purpose, and her voice could only be heard by Yang Yi. "I've never thought about becoming the Sword Emperor," said Yang Yi in a flat tone. "Why?" The woman was puzzled. "Because I can still make all swords submit before me even without you," Yang Yi said. "I've already experienced how terrifying you are. Indeed, even I don't dare to utilize the sword in front of you because your suppression towards the sword is too terrifying. However, you're a form of restraint to me, and I can imagine how I would rely on your strength if I did possess you. How can one rely on an external source of strength while cultivating in the sword Tao?" The woman fell silent for a short while before she laughed bitterly and said, "Someone spoke similar words to me 10,000 years ago. You ought to know who it was. Just like you, he disdained to possess my strength. Now, I slightly understand why he was able to crush the martial god of his time and you were able to crush the sword emperor of this age. Because both of you possess the purest heart towards the sword Tao." Yang Yi didn't answer her. His profound energy surged instead while he pointed his sword at Imo Qingyu. His intentions were obvious. When she saw Yang Yi act like this, the woman said, "Can you spare her? You're already a legend that has crushed the Sword Emperor. So spare her life, all right?" "No!" Yang Yi refused decisively and said, "Not only would she feel no gratitude towards me, she will even feel stronger hatred towards me, right? Moreover, it's exactly because of her that someone I love is unconscious and unable to wake up until now. So, she must die. If you stop me, then you can die together." As soon as he spoke, the nether ghost flame suddenly shot forward and attached itself onto the sword in his grasp. He had to utilize the nether ghost flame when facing this woman so that his sword wouldn't be suppressed by her. Otherwise, not to mention launching an attack, he might even suffer backlash from his sword. "You aren't a match for me if I remove the seal on myself," said the woman in a flat voice. "The problem is that you can't, right?" Yang Yi said, "Someone above the king realm can't attack the participating profounders in the ancient battlefield. If you do remove the seal on your strength, then would they allow it? In the end, she's the Sword Emperor that I chose, so I can't watch her die." The woman spoke in a low voice. Yang Yi grinned, but his grin was savage. He said, "You mean that only she can kill me, and I can't kill her?" The woman sighed and said, "Then make your move." "Of course." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand left his grasp, and it emanated a fiery glow as it flashed like a bolt of lightning towards Imo Qingyu. Yang Yi hadn't held back at all, and he'd utilized the soul-seek sword technique that was enhanced by the nether ghost flame as soon as he'd attacked. The woman sighed lightly when she saw Yang Yi attack, and then her figure started to become ethereal and faintly transformed into the shape of a sword. However, right at this moment, the soul-seek sword technique had suddenly turned around and shot violently towards the woman. It turned out that Yang Ye's true objective was the spirit of the ancient sheath. As the spectators in the surroundings watched this scene, the corners of their mouths twitched. Isn't this fellow a little too audacious? That's the spirit of the ancient sheath. He actually dares to launch a lethal strike against it? Xianxia didn't care about all of that. He'd merely taken her to be his enemy. Since she was his enemy, then she deserved to be killed. As for whether he could kill her or not, he would only know after he tried. The flaming sword was extremely swift, and it instantly arrived in front of the woman. However, she showed no intention to dodge it, and she just stretched out two pure white fingers to clamp the sword and successfully held it between her fingers. Xianxia wasn't surprised and said lightly, "Explode!" As soon as he spoke, the nether ghost flame suddenly exploded apart, and then a terrifying wave of fire instantly enveloped the woman. Right when Xianxia had heaved a sigh of relief, a strand of light suddenly shot into the sky from within the wave of fire. Xianxia's brows knit together tightly when he witnessed this scene because he knew that he was unable to kill her. The woman didn't stay here. She took Mo Qingyu along as she transformed into a ray of light and vanished into the horizon. Xianxia's eyes carried icy cold killing intent as he watched Mo Qingyu being taken away by the woman. Looks like fairness really doesn't exist in this world. Earlier, the woman had clearly utilized a strength that exceeded the king realm, but no one had come to stop her. Haha, it looks like those so-called great figures in ancient domain city don't dare to offend this mysterious ancient sheath as well. Besides that, Xianxia felt even more disdain towards the so-called Sword Emperor, because the Sword Emperor merely relied on the might of the ancient sheath. For example, Mo Qingyu would have died just now if she didn't have the ancient sheath. He didn't know if the Sword Emperors of the past were the same. But in any case, he truly felt disdain from the bottom of his heart towards the title of Sword Emperor. She can't even accept defeat, yet she calls herself the Sword Emperor? I'll definitely kill Mo Qingyu next time. Definitely. Xianxia shook his head, withdrew his gaze, and then turned around to look at Mo Ku and the others. Even though he'd utilized the sword formation twice and the soul-seek sword technique once just now, the top-grade energy stone's effect allowed his body to still possess a huge amount of profound energy right now. In any case, he could still utilize the ghost flame sword formation for one last time. He didn't intend to let Mo Ku and the others go. Of course, Mo Ku and the others didn't intend to let him go as well. After the ancient sheath spirit took Mo Qingyu away, Mo Ku, Han Yu, and Mu Jun had locked onto Xianxia's aura. Moreover, they'd formed a triangle that surrounded Xianxia. Their intentions were obvious. They didn't want to let Xianxia flee. Xianxia had never thought of fleeing, nor had he thought about whether he could fight Mo Ku, Han Yu, and Mu Jun by himself. Moreover, there was no need for him to think about that as well, because he had to fight whether he wanted to or not, so what was the point of thinking so much about it? In the end, he would only know the outcome after he gave it a try. Xianxia twisted his wrist, and then the nether ghost flame flew into his palm before he issued a command in his heart. The 200 swords transformed into 200 rays of light that circled around him, and the nether ghost flame shot out with a flick of his finger, causing those 200 swords to instantly transform into flaming swords. At the same time, his slaughter sword intent surged out violently and enhanced those swords as well. Xianxia glanced at Mo Ku and the others while residing at the center of the sword formation, and then he roared with laughter and said, "Didn't the three of you want to kill me? I, Xianxia, am standing right here, so what are you waiting for?" He spoke in an extremely arrogant and overbearing manner, and it caused the blood of the countless human profounders on the walls of ancient domain city to boil. Even though most of them couldn't stand the sight of Xianxia in the past, they had no choice to admit that Xianxia really did bring glory to the human race. After all, they'd suffered at the hands of Mo Ku and the devil profounders throughout the past month. The devil profounders had been wildly slaughtering human profounders below the city, but they could only watch helplessly from above the city walls. Not to mention leaving the city to fight the devil profounders, they didn't even dare to curse the devil profounders. Needless to say, this was extremely aggrieving. Now, Xianxia's actions had undoubtedly brought glory to the human race, and it caused the devil race and Mo Ku to lose face. So, they felt extremely delighted at this moment. Indeed, Mo Ku, Han Yu, and Mu Jun had extremely unsightly expressions right now. If Yang Yi was still alive after today, then they would be utterly humiliated. After all, others wouldn't care whether they'd concealed their strength or if there were any other reasons for it. The profounders of the entire continent would only care that Yang Yi had resisted all four of them on his own. Yang Ye's name would spread throughout the continent, and they would be existences that served as contrast to that. So Yang Yi had to die. He had to die even if they had no choice but to expose their trump cards. Even though they were from different races, the three of them were of the same mind at this moment. Right when the three of them were about to attack, a woman that held a golden spear in her hand appeared below Ancient Domain City. The woman walked step by step towards the city at a rather slow speed, but she drew the attention of everyone. Who's that woman? Doesn't she know that those extraordinarily monstrous geniuses are fighting there? Is she not afraid of death? Where did this human ant come from? Fuck off. A profounder from the nether race flashed over to the woman, and then he condensed a strand of black energy that enveloped down towards the woman. However, right at this moment, the woman suddenly vanished on the spot before she appeared over 30 m away, whereas the figure of that profounder had stiffened on the spot. The crowd on the city walls was puzzled, whereas Moku and the others revealed extremely solemn expressions, because they knew what had just happened. Earlier, the woman had attacked at the same moment that the profounder from the nether race had launched an attack against her. However, she was too swift, and it was swift to the point that it was like teleportation. Moreover, her attack was truly too terrifying. Why was it said to be terrifying? Because she'd utilized her gaze to kill that profounder from the nether race. Yes, she'd instantly annihilated a king realm profounder with just a glance. Yang Ye's expression had become solemn as well. This woman gave him an extremely dangerous feeling. She was very dangerous, and that feeling of danger that she gave off was much stronger than Moku and the others. The woman walked over to Moku, Yang Yi, and the others. She gazed at the four of them with an indifferent gaze before she said, "Move aside."